Once, these names ruled highways. Their lorries hauled nations, built cities, and powered entire industries. Then, almost overnight, they vanished. Not because they were weak, not because they were bad, but because timing, money, and brutal competition showed no mercy. Some were victims of bad deals. Some were crushed by giants. Some simply arrived too early. Today, only rusted badges and fading photos remain. This is the story of 10 classic lorry brands that disappeared too soon. Legends of the road that history left behind. Number 1. ERF. ERF was never just another lorry manufacturer. Founded in 1933 by Edwin Richard Foden, whose own family name was already legendary in British truck building, ERF was created with a very specific philosophy: build lorries around what operators actually wanted, not what accountants or marketing departments thought they should buy. From the beginning, ERF focused on heavy-duty commercial vehicles, especially tractors and rigid lorries for haulage, construction, and specialist work. Unlike many manufacturers, ERF did not insist on proprietary engines. Operators could specify Cummins, Gardner, Perkins, or Rolls-Royce power plants, depending on their needs. This flexibility made ERF hugely popular with fleet owners who cared about fuel economy, torque characteristics, and serviceability. An ERF could be tailored to a job in a way few other trucks could match. That reputation carried through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, when ERF became one of Britain's most respected heavy truck builders. By the 1980s and 1990s, ERF trucks like the EC Series and later the E Series were common sights on UK roads. They were known for solid chassis construction, straightforward engineering, and excellent real-world efficiency. ERF never chased flashy styling. Its trucks looked honest, square, functional, and built for work. That image appealed strongly to professional hauliers. However, the industry around ERF was changing rapidly. Emissions regulations became stricter. Development costs for new cabs, drivetrains, and electronic systems rose dramatically. Large multinational groups could amortize these costs across hundreds of thousands of vehicles worldwide. A relatively small British manufacturer could not. In 2000, ERF was acquired by MAN of Germany. Initially, this seemed like salvation. MAN kept the ERF name alive, producing trucks in Middlewich and blending MAN technology with ERF identity. For a few years, ERF-branded trucks continued to appear, carrying British character with German engineering underneath. But economics slowly erased the need for a separate badge. Platforms became shared. Production was rationalized. Maintaining two brands selling essentially the same trucks in overlapping markets no longer made sense. In 2007, MAN formally ended the ERF mark. ERF did not die because its trucks were poor. It died because the modern truck industry no longer had room for small independent philosophies. What disappeared was not just a name, but an approach, one that put the operator first in a very personal way. Number 2. Foden. Foden's roots stretched back to the 19th century. Long before diesel engines ruled the roads, Foden was building steam-powered road wagons. That heritage gave the company immense prestige in Britain. Through the 20th century, Foden became synonymous with high-quality heavy lorries, especially multi-axle tractors and specialist haulage vehicles. Foden trucks were known for their distinctive appearance, well-proportioned cabs, solid construction, and a certain British character that set them apart from continental designs. Operators valued them for durability and road manners. By the 1960s and 70s, Foden had carved out a loyal following among heavy haulage firms and long-distance operators. In 1980, Foden was acquired by PACCAR, the American group that owned DF, Peterbilt, and Kenworth. Initially, this seemed promising. PACCAR had deep pockets and global reach. Foden continued to operate from Sandbach, producing trucks that blended its identity with more modern technology. But as the decades progressed, PACCAR's strategy became clear: concentrate European production around DF. Maintaining two parallel British truck brands no longer made economic sense. Foden volumes were relatively small. Each new cab or engine generation required enormous investment. From a corporate perspective, it was cheaper and more logical to sell DF-branded trucks through the same dealer networks. By the early 2000s, Foden had effectively become a niche badge on DF-based hardware. In 2006, Karrier ended Foden production entirely. The last Foden rolled off the line in July of that year. What vanished with Foden was more than a factory. It was a lineage stretching back over 150 years. Unlike brands that failed through mismanagement or poor products, Foden disappeared because the modern truck world values scale above heritage. Its loss symbolized the end of Britain as a nation of independent heavy lorry builders. Number 3. Seddon Atkinson's. Seddon Atkinson was born from merger. In 1970, Seddon diesel vehicles and Atkinson vehicles combined forces, uniting two Lancashire firms with complementary strengths. Atkinson brought a reputation for rugged heavy chassis. Seddon contributed more modern diesel expertise and lighter vehicles. Together they formed a uniquely British commercial vehicle manufacturer capable of serving everything from refuse collection to heavy haulage. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Seddon Atkinson produced a wide range of lorries. Some models became iconic in municipal roles, refuse trucks, tippers, and specialist chassis that populated city streets across the UK. The brand gained a reputation for practical, no-nonsense engineering and adaptability. Yet Seddon Atkinson was rarely allowed to stand still. Ownership passed from International Harvester to the Spanish manufacturer NSA, and eventually to Iveco. Each change altered priorities. Investment waxed and waned. Platforms became increasingly shared with parent company products. By the 1990s, Seddon Atkinson's independence had been eroded. The trucks still wore the badge, but beneath the panels they were becoming Iveco in structure and philosophy. Production shifted away from traditional British facilities. The brand survived largely in niche applications, such as refuse and construction vehicles. In 2009, Iveco withdrew the Seddon Atkinson mark altogether. The remaining models were absorbed into Iveco's lineup. Seddon Atkinson's story is tragic in a subtle way. It was not a failure. It was a capable, respected manufacturer that simply existed in an era when independence was a liability. Each corporate reshuffle stripped a little more identity away, until only the name remained, and then even that was deemed unnecessary. Number 4. Scammell. Scammell was never a mass-market brand. From its earliest days, it focused on solving problems other manufacturers avoided: heavy haulage, recovery vehicles, tank transporters, military tractors. Scammell built machines for extreme tasks. Its designs were often unconventional. Articulated tractors with unique coupling systems, heavy-duty ballast rigs, and purpose-built transporters defined the brand. When governments or industries needed something extraordinary moved, Scammell was often the answer. During the mid-20th century, Scammell became legendary for military vehicles such as the Pioneer and later heavy transporters. Civilian operators also valued Scammell for abnormal loads, construction and recovery work. These were not everyday lorries, they were specialists, but specialization became a weakness. As British Leyland reorganized its commercial vehicle operations in the 1970s, Scammell's low-volume, high-complexity products were hard to justify. The industry was moving towards standardized platforms and higher production efficiency. In 1988, Scammell's Watford works closed. The mark effectively ended. Some designs were continued in modified form by other manufacturers, but the Scammell name disappeared. Scammell's loss represents the end of an era when truck builders could exist purely to solve unique problems. Modern logistics favors uniformity. Scammell thrived on exception. When the industry chose scale over specialization, there was no place left for it. Number 5. Karrier. Karrier was once one of the most familiar names on British roads. Founded in 1905, the company became a backbone of everyday commerce. Its vans and lorries delivered bread, mail, tools, fuel, and military supplies. Unlike prestige heavy truck builders, Karrier specialized in practical, mid-range commercial vehicles that kept towns and cities running. For decades, if a business needed a dependable delivery truck, Karrier was often the answer. What made Karrier special was its versatility. The brand offered everything from light vans to medium-duty lorries and military vehicles. During World War II, Karrier produced thousands of trucks for the British Armed Forces, cementing its reputation for rugged reliability. After the war, its vehicles powered Britain's rebuilding effort, hauling materials and goods across a nation in recovery. Karrier became part of the Roots Group, which also owned brands like Humber and Hillman. Under Roots, Karrier flourished, producing popular models such as the Karrier FC and later the forward control vans that became iconic in the 1960s. These vehicles were everywhere, on high streets, industrial estates, and rural lanes. But the corporate world around Karrier changed dramatically. Roots was taken over by Chrysler in the late 1960s, and later Chrysler's European operations were sold to PSA Peugeot Citroën. Each takeover brought a new wave of rationalization. Executives looked at overlapping product lines and asked, why keep multiple brands doing similar jobs? By the late 1970s, Karrier's identity had become inconvenient. Its factories and models were merged into broader corporate structures. Vehicles once sold as Karrier's began appearing under different badges. In practical terms, the Karrier name vanished around 9. What makes Karrier's disappearance so striking is that it did not fail. Its trucks were not outdated overnight. Customers still trusted them. But in a world driven by corporate efficiency, history and familiarity were expendable. Karrier didn't go out with a bang. There was no dramatic collapse. It simply faded, its name quietly removed from grilles and brochures. A brand that had served Britain for over 70 years disappeared not because it was weak, but because it no longer fit into a global balance sheet. Number 6. Albion. Albion Motors began in Glasgow in 1899 and grew into one of Scotland's most respected industrial names. For decades, Albion produced light and medium commercial vehicles and buses that were known for strength, reliability, and conservative engineering. Its trucks became familiar across Britain and export markets, particularly in Commonwealth countries. Albion vehicles were often chosen for demanding environments, rural routes, rough roads, and heavy-duty municipal work. The brand built a reputation for doing things the solid way. Its chassis were robust, its engines dependable, and its designs intentionally conservative. Albion did not chase fashion, it chased durability. In 1951, Albion was acquired by Leyland Motors. At first, the brand remained intact. Albion-badged vehicles continued to be produced, and the Scottstoun factory remained active. However, as Leyland grew into a national champion and later into British Leyland, corporate priorities shifted. The goal became unification, shared components, fewer platforms, fewer brands. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Albion's individuality was being stripped away. Its vehicles increasingly shared designs with Leyland products. The badge remained, but the engineering identity faded. In 1972, production of Albion-badged trucks effectively ceased, and by 1980, the Scottstoun factory had ended mass vehicle manufacture. Albion did not collapse, it was absorbed. What vanished was Scotland's independent commercial vehicle voice. The name that once stood proudly on grilles across Britain became a historical footnote. Albion's fate reflects how national industrial strategy can erase regional heritage. In the push to create a unified British motor industry, smaller identities were sacrificed. Albion's disappearance reminds us that not all lost brands failed. Some were simply deemed unnecessary in a new corporate order. Number 7. Thornycroft. Thornycroft was one of Britain's earliest commercial vehicle innovators. Founded by John I Thornycroft in the late 19th century, the company produced everything from steam wagons to early petrol-powered lorries, buses, and military vehicles. At a time when motor transport itself was experimental, Thornycroft was already building machines for industry and defense. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, Thornycroft's vehicles served in civilian and military roles. The company earned a reputation for engineering excellence and mechanical robustness. Its trucks and buses were known for quality rather than mass production. But post-war Britain became a difficult environment for specialist manufacturers. Development costs rose. Government policy encouraged consolidation. Larger groups could invest in new engines, safety systems, and production methods. Smaller firms struggled to compete. Thornycroft became part of larger industrial groups, and its independent vehicle production gradually wound down. By the 1960s and early 1970s, Thornycroft's presence in the road vehicle market was shrinking. In 1977, Thornycroft ceased producing road vehicles altogether. Unlike brands that died suddenly, Thornycroft faded with dignity. Its engineers moved on, its factories adapted, but its name disappeared from the roads. What makes Thornycroft's story poignant is its pioneering role. It helped invent the very concept of the commercial lorry. Yet the industry it helped create eventually became too large and too capital-intensive for a company of its scale. Thornycroft represents the transition from craftsmanship to industrial mass production. It was a bridge between eras, and bridges are rarely remembered once crossed. Number 8. Bedford. Bedford was the commercial vehicle arm of Vauxhall, and by extension, General Motors. For much of the 20th century, Bedford was one of Britain's most successful lorry and van brands. Its vehicles were exported worldwide. In many countries, Bedford became synonymous with truck. Bedford produced a vast range of vehicles from light vans to heavy goods lorries and military trucks. Its Dunstable factory became a cornerstone of British commercial vehicle manufacturing. Bedford served in wars, in colonial infrastructure projects, and in everyday civilian life. However, by the late 1970s and early 1980s, Bedford's heavy truck designs were aging. Updating them to meet modern emissions and safety standards required massive investment. General Motors faced a choice: pour money into a uniquely British heavy truck line, or exit that segment entirely. GM chose to withdraw. In 1986, Bedford ceased producing heavy trucks. Some operations were sold off, and a successor company attempted to continue parts of the range. But the Bedford name as a major lorry brand was effectively over. What makes Bedford's disappearance different from others is that it was a strategic retreat by a global giant. The brand did not fail in the market. GM simply decided that heavy lorries were no longer worth pursuing in Europe. A name that once spanned continents vanished because it no longer aligned with corporate priorities. Bedford's fate shows how even large, successful brands can disappear overnight when ownership changes direction. In the modern world, heritage matters less than return on investment. Number 9. Guy Motors. Guy Motors began in 1914 in Wolverhampton and quickly became one of Britain's most innovative commercial vehicle builders. From the start, Guy was ambitious. It produced lorries, buses, and later trolleybuses, gaining a reputation for technical experimentation and high-performance designs. During the interwar years and after World War II, Guy vehicles were common in municipal fleets, public transport systems, and long-distance haulage. One of Guy's defining strengths was engineering boldness. The company was willing to try advanced layouts, powerful engines, and modern cab designs long before many rivals. Its post-war buses, in particular, were admired for performance and build quality. Guy lorries, such as the Big J series, offered impressive power and payload for their class, making them popular with operators who valued performance. However, innovation alone does not guarantee survival. The British commercial vehicle industry entered a period of instability during the 1950s and 60s. Rising costs, fragmented production, and increasing international competition put pressure on independent manufacturers. Guy struggled financially and was acquired by Jaguar in 1961, then later absorbed into British Leyland. Under British Leyland, Guy lost strategic independence. Development priorities shifted, and resources were spread thin across many brands. Guy's identity gradually eroded. Factories were reorganized, product lines rationalized, and long-term investment became uncertain. Although Guy vehicles continued to be produced for a time, they increasingly shared components and platforms with other group products. By the late 1970s, Guy's future was precarious. In 1982, the Fallings Park plant in Wolverhampton closed. Production effectively ceased, and the Guy name disappeared from new vehicles soon after. Guy did not vanish because its vehicles were obsolete. On the contrary, it had often been ahead of its time. What destroyed Guy was instability, ownership changes, shifting priorities, and the difficulty of sustaining a mid-sized manufacturer in a consolidating industry. Its disappearance illustrates a harsh truth of industrial history. Even technically excellent companies can be undone by financial turbulence and corporate restructuring. Guy left behind a legacy of innovation and engineering courage, but no living successor to carry that spirit forward. Number 10. Karrier. Karrier began in the early 20th century and became famous for building vehicles tailored to municipal and urban work. Rather than chasing long-haul haulage or heavy construction markets, Karrier focused on what cities needed: refuse trucks, small tippers, street cleaning vehicles, and compact industrial chassis. Its designs were practical, compact, and purpose-built for tight streets and repetitive daily duties. One of Karrier's most iconic products was the mechanical horse, a small articulated tractor designed for quick trailer swapping in urban environments. It became a familiar sight in British towns and ports. Karrier's vehicles were not glamorous, but they were brilliantly suited to their roles. Local councils, postal services, and utilities depended on them. In 1934, Karrier became part of the Rootes Group, joining brands like Karrier. For decades, the name survived within this corporate family. Karrier-badged vehicles continued to serve municipal markets through the mid-20th century, often sharing engineering with Karrier while retaining a distinct identity focused on civic work. But as with Karrier, corporate ownership reshaped Karrier's destiny. Rootes was taken over by Chrysler in the 1960s, and later Chrysler Europe was sold to PSA Peugeot Citroën. Each transition brought product rationalization. Executives saw little reason to maintain separate municipal brands when platforms and factories could be unified. By the early 1970s, new vehicles rarely carried the Karrier name. Designs that once would have been branded Karrier were sold under other badges. By around 1979, the Karrier mark had effectively disappeared. Karrier's loss is particularly symbolic. It represented a category of manufacturer devoted to civic life. Its vehicles were built not for profit margins or glamour, but for keeping cities clean, supplied, and functioning. The disappearance of Karrier shows how specialization became a liability in a globalized industry. Municipal needs could be met by generic platforms, and the identity of a specialist brand was no longer valued. What vanished was not just a badge, but a philosophy, that a vehicle could be designed around the rhythms of a city rather than the demands of mass production. So that's it for today. If you like this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button for more videos. Thanks for watching.